Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Schwartz, Head of Public Affairs at Tableau, and I'm thrilled that you can be with us here today in the Kaiser Permanente Healthy Housing Lounge down here at South by Southwest. It's an incredibly exciting day for us here for Tableau Foundation. We're announcing a significant partnership with an organization called Community Solutions. They're a national leader in addressing homelessness and really the use of data to make sure we're able to get help to people when they need it and when it can make the most difference in their lives. Thrilled to be here with Roseanne Haggerty, President of Community Solutions, and Ned Desmond, COO of TechCrunch. We're going to spend some time today talking about Community Solutions. We're going to take a look at some of the dashboards, some of the data that they're working with, really dig into the issue, find out what's going on, why this approach is different, and why it can make a difference. And that's what we're really excited about. Let me start by turning to you, Ned. This is an organization that you're passionate about and an issue you're passionate about. As you start a conversation here with Roseanne, could you tell us a little bit about why?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here with Roseanne today. I have been following Roseanne for a long time because we went to college together, and I've always admired her work. And when I knew that she switched over to the current program, which is so interestingly putting data to work, and I happen to work in Silicon Valley, it seemed like a great time to reconnect, and we have been in touch in recent years, and I continue, of course, to be a great admirer, and I also live in an area that has a terrible homelessness problem. So in that way, all things kind of came together for me, and I'm very happy to be with her here today. So how are you enjoying South by Southwest, Roseanne?
Exciting place to be, a little overwhelming.
Yes, it is a very overwhelming. It's my first time here too. So let's get right into it. You have spent your entire life working to address homelessness, and there's a very interesting story that goes along with that journey. Do you think that's a good place to start?
I think, Ned, the fact that we moved from being an organization that was doing what most people think is the thing you need to do to end homelessness, which is just add more housing. We did that. We were leaders in doing that and realized that that was insufficient. Important, but insufficient. And so spent 20 years building what's called permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. And that means affordable housing linked to health and mental health services that gets people out of homelessness for good. But frankly, we were seeing the numbers of people experiencing homelessness in our city, New York City alone at that time, which is where we were based, increasing. And we were seeing people who'd been homeless for years on the streets in Midtown Manhattan, still on the street, even as we were opening more and more buildings. And it became pretty evident that there was this missing dimension, which is who's accounting for the whole? How are we seeing that everything we're doing that is valuable and good and effective for the people we're reaching actually adds up to a full solution for everyone experiencing homelessness? And it was really out of understanding there was a huge gap, and we needed to step back and think about the issue differently, that led us to the insight, after many years of testing our way forward, that without data to tell you in real time, by name, how everything is adding up to a solution, how services are getting delivered effectively to the people who need them at the right time, whether all of a community's investments are the right ones to be making and are actually having the effect of solving the problem as opposed to perpetuating activity. That's what led us down this road and to this terrific partnership with Tableau, which has really advanced our work to a whole new level. Their data visualization platform is making data analytics accessible as an instrumental tool to communities all over the country that are part of our Built for Zero movement.
That's really fascinating. I mean, in Silicon Valley, we'd call that a pivot. So at one point, you thought you had it figured out. It was all about getting municipalities to build more housing, but then suddenly that wasn't working.
Yeah, I think we kind of disrupted ourselves.
Yes, you did. Well, congratulations to you. That's not an easy thing to do. Was there a sort of eureka moment when this all became clear to you?
There were a few moments that reinforced each other. There was one very powerful one where one of these poor souls who would be on the streets in Times Square year after year actually ended up seeking out housing help via a social worker. And when this elderly, very frail woman moved into one of our buildings, I was very curious to know why she had refused help, getting to a shelter or any of these emergency services that existed in abundance. She said very plainly, no one ever offered me help with finding a home. And I was like, I think the city of New York was spending north of $10 million on outreach at that point, asking the wrong question. Do you want to ride to a shelter? To people who were just so broken and yet determined to hang on to a vision of a real end to their trauma. That was a bit of a wake-up call, to say the least, that those of us who thought we were the experts were really missing a very profound piece of this story. And so with a small team, we really just started going out to the streets of our neighborhood and asking people who'd been homeless a long time what they needed to get out of homelessness. And changing the question really brought us, we didn't have a language for it at the time, but brought us into the world of human-centered design and beginning to build a new way of thinking about this issue from the point of view of people experiencing homelessness. And then we realized that all of these people had just sort of been known as numbers. And that's where beginning to account for people individually with their own stories attached to their experience of homelessness. We could see the huge variation in the kinds of experiences people had, that just within our own neighborhood, there were people who'd been homeless a night and were going to figure it out. There was just some disruption. And there were people who'd been on the street for 30 years. And that these were actually very different problems. And again, without very specific real-time information on what was happening, how could we hope to turn this around? And out of that relatively small, you might call it the minimum viable product experience in our neighborhood, that's what evolved into our first national effort called 100,000 Homes. And that involved ultimately 186 communities around the United States who opted in to learn how to put their housing resources together a lot more effectively and accelerate housing placements. And the great news was that over the course of 4 years, more than 105,000 people who'd been chronically homeless or were medically frail and homeless were housed in these communities. And it represented something like a 200% increase in housing placements using the resources these communities had for the most part. So it was really about just system performance. But we didn't see any community that had gotten anywhere close to ending homelessness. They'd gotten better at housing placement, hadn't ended homelessness. And that again was this kind of aha moment, this gap, like, we're doing more of what we think we should be doing, but it's not adding up to the solution.
Built for Zero has become kind of an organizing principle, right? Because you put zero in there and suddenly we're talking about a number. And that's an entirely different ballgame, right?
Yeah. But the zero people in the world are the ones you want to hang out with. Who's out there eradicating polio? Who's making sure that there's job safety is paramount at complex construction sites? Who's making sure we don't have nuclear power plants blowing up, or that planes are landing safely? The industries with the rigor to put safety at the center of their purpose and to organize everyone's activity around that. We have these examples in the world, and I think part of what has been exciting is with the real kind of commitment of these communities that we've been working with, the understanding that the right problem-solving tools and skills are out there in the world, that they can be adapted to help communities solve this problem. That's what has been kind of embedded in the Built for Zero movement, methodology, the idea that these tools and these ideas are out there, we can bring them together, we can share them with communities, and communities can improve them and share them with each other.
Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the Built for Zero program is going, because you're well represented across the country now with a lot of programs up and running.
We're now working with 70 communities, and another 5 are joining shortly. We have, of that group, 64 communities that now have by name real-time information on everyone experiencing homelessness. So they have this 360-degree view of what is a dynamic problem and an ability to see who's affected, how they're affected, how the problem itself at a community level is shifting and changing, whether their interventions are working. We have 10 places now that have ended chronic or veteran homelessness, another 34 that are steadily reducing month over month. So we have hugely promising evidence that this ability to understand a system, to combine all of the activities of a community toward ending homelessness and tell whether they're working, that we actually have tools to see whether that's happening now, and that's the beginning of the shift that we see as possible.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the data with your colleague in a minute, but just as a bystander, I guess, to the homelessness situation in my hometown of Boston or in San Francisco, where I work these days, it's hard to imagine going to zero, just because it seems like the conditions of the people are so variable. You have to wonder, can we get that person into housing? Would they accept it? But I understand from conversations past with you that that's not really the way it works. That somehow a lot of things need to be addressed with housing first. Mm-hmm. How do you work through that?
Well, one thing to bear in mind is, as awful and overwhelming, even in some cities like the one you live in, Ned, that where it just seems, how do we ever get our arms around this? We, I think, in every city see rates of homelessness that are well under 1% of that community's population. So flipped, you can see this, we're successfully housing the vast majority of our people. And so this is a last mile problem. And so, always to take encouragement from the fact that, we know how to house people. But I think it's easy for people to believe that maybe the problem is with the individual, that they don't want to be helped, that they don't want housing. We have found in all of these communities now over many years, looking at what the barriers are, they are almost 100% system barriers. The community is just not organized and not able to not organized effectively, not able to see whether what they're doing is working, whether they're making their investments in the right places. We see over and over again that even individuals who are perceived as not wanting to be helped, often it's they don't want that ride to the shelter. The elderly woman I mentioned earlier, she was interested in help with a home, not with the help that happened to be offered to her. And we have seen also that sometimes it's a question of timing, that maybe at the moment, the person is first encountered for reasons of health or mental health or other barriers, that there's resistance. But at worst, just getting people into a well-functioning housing system that's focused on results, enabled by data to see whether it's all working, that's a 90% solution. And that smaller group that's going to take more time, that really is a group of people who can be helped. It's just going to require probably more flexibility, more patience.
I see. But it's quite remarkable. 10 communities have reached what you're describing as functional zero with either chronic or veteran or both in terms of homelessness.
Right. And, one of the things to be aware of, too, is that ending homelessness and reaching that kind of that place where it's a problem that's, getting solved every day, it looks like kind of a well-run emergency room. It's not like no one in the community will ever have a housing crisis again, but they become rare, and when they become a manifest in homelessness, that gets solved immediately, quickly, and appropriately so it doesn't happen again. And so the end of homelessness means we just, as communities, learn to stay on top of and reduce the risk of people ever becoming homeless. And again, these are ways of working that have been mastered in other sectors. People are familiar with the skills of data analytics, quality improvement, the way you see whether kind of all the parts are coming together. And that really is the promise of this work.
So I suppose if you're running an airline, you always have to have the parts there on time, right? Because planes need to be fixed and sent on their way. And in a way, this is about addressing it as a dynamic problem. So there will always be occasions when people become homeless. Mm-hmm. The question is, I guess, whether the municipalities know how to address it and detect it.
Yes, and put most of their energy into prevention. That as we learn more and more about who's vulnerable, what causes people to be vulnerable, who needs to be working together differently, that really is where the future is, in just reducing the incidents altogether, and then when it happens, quickly responding in an appropriate way. We can draw so many parallels as well with public health and all of the things that we know work to every day kind of keep people safe and healthy, that are sort of invisible because they're working, but that's the way to think about homelessness, that actually so many of these communities that we're working with in Built for Zero are now demonstrating is true.
And what's your aspiration in the next year or two for Built for Zero?
Well, thanks to the Tableau partnership and these amazing communities that have stepped up and have been the vanguard of this movement, our goal is to be at 50 proof points of communities having ended chronic or veteran homelessness by 2025. And we think that running alongside that, there's a very significant mission that is about norm shifting. We need as a country to realize that this is a solvable problem. And just as we've seen an enormous shift in norms around things like seatbelt use or drunk driving or smoking, this is an issue that perception matters. If you understand that communities can solve this problem, we think that belief is going to be very critical to accelerating the change that we see is absolutely available to communities.
This is fantastic. Thank you, Roseanne. What a great explanation. It gives me so much hope that these folks who aren't able to put their heads on a soft pillow at night might get there before too long. Well, we're going to turn now to your colleague, Jake McGuire, who's going to show us a little bit about how the data dashboards work and what the people who are working in these systems really see day in and day out and how they measure their progress. So thanks again.
Thank you, Ned.
So I'm over here with Jake McGuire, who is a colleague at Community Solutions of Roseanne's, and he's in charge of the data story at Community Solutions. He's a gentleman who makes it happen on the ground for all of these communities that are actively involved in trying to use data to address the homelessness situation. So thank you, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Nick.
So this is, I assume, a picture of the world from the standpoint of, or at least the United States from the standpoint of Community Solutions. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of how the data story begins and how that conversation goes with these communities and what this represents to them?
Sure. Yeah, what you're looking at here is a map of, this is Built for Zero, our national initiative to end chronic and veteran homelessness. As Roseanne mentioned, it's 70 communities with several more joining. And when you see these little blue pins, those are actually places that have gotten all the way to zero for one population or another. So sort of examples of success springing up across the country. But our work with communities starts long before that. It usually starts with trying to convince communities that you could even end homelessness. In other words, is this even possible? I think what we see is people's story is this is a human behavior problem. It may not be something we can address. We may just kind of have to live with it. And so a lot of our work is trying to get all the different players on the ground in a community to say, actually, we want to think bigger. That's something we want to go for. And then once you can get people to say that, very, very quickly, you have to start to have a conversation about measurement and data. And so that's kind of where we go next. You can see each of these communities. If we were to click through on one of these pins, I'm just going to...
Which one are you going to pick?
Yeah, I'm going to pick Cook County, which is right outside of Chicago.
Aha, okay, great.
This is a fairly large geography. It's a suburban county, but pretty populous. And what we're looking at here is basically a record over time, month over month, of veteran homelessness in Cook County.
I see. So veterans a subsection of the general homelessness population.
Yeah, this is a place a lot of communities choose to start. It's usually a place they can mobilize some political will around. It's a place they can kind of get things going. And the assumption is sort of if we could pick a population like veterans and kind of figure out what it takes, we could use that knowledge to then start to scale out to other groups.
Are veterans a pretty significant part of the homelessness population in some localities?
This is actually a really interesting success story for the country over the last 10 years or so. For a long time, veterans were really disproportionately represented among the homeless population. In the last 10 years or so, we have cut that number across the country roughly in half. And 9 of our communities have actually gotten to zero all the way on veteran homelessness. So it's really a place where I think people are starting to have a lot of success, and that's becoming kind of an important proof point.
Great. And
for
so
other
it's a great consistent way across the country to talk about one category of homelessness. And
yeah,
that's great.
Everybody has veterans.
Right.
You know, everybody can get behind the idea that we should be supporting vets to get off the street. So it's a pretty natural place for a lot of people to start.
So is this something that folks who are managing homelessness in Cooks County would be looking at? Would they be checking this data sheet out here?
Yeah, let me, if I could, I guess
Sure.
sort of tell you the story of like how you get to a place like this, and then kind of what it is that we're looking at.
Great.
I think it is probably conventional wisdom to most folks in the tech sector say that you need data as frequently as possible on any problem you're trying to solve to sort of know what's happening and
Absolutely.
be able to make decisions.
Right.
It may surprise a lot of people to know that in homelessness, we are mostly operating in most communities with data that's collected once a year.
Once a year?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what happens is every year in January, communities are sort of required by the federal government to sort of flood their streets with volunteers and walk around with tally sheets. And anybody that a volunteer thinks might be homeless, you know, you don't have to talk to them, you don't actually have to ask them anything. You just sort of mark off a tally. And there are all sorts of crazy stories, like communities giving guidance that says things like, if you see an RV and it's empty, make 2 tallies. We'll call that 2 people, right? So it's sort of this like weird way of trying to account for this problem without any actual nuance or understanding what's really going on. Then that data gets sent off to HUD, and 11 months later, if you can believe that, after a lot of statistical manipulation, HUD sends back an extrapolated number and says, this is how many people we think were experiencing homelessness on one night in your community 11 months ago. So now, you know, this community—
That doesn't sound very useful.
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, what are we going to do with that? You know, we've got this number. We don't know who these people are. We don't know if they're still out there. Even if we did, we don't know anything about them or what they need. So it just becomes very difficult to use that kind of data to get a handle on the problem or do anything about it. So I think when we decided we were going to try to get communities to go all the way to zero, one of the first things we realized was we're going to have to find a way to get communities more comprehensive data on the problem on a more regular basis. We have a kind of a simple axiom that we use to describe our approach here, which is basically no community, we think, can end homelessness without real-time, by-name data on every single person experiencing the problem. The challenge was no one had ever sort of gotten to that kind of data in a community before. And in a lot of cases, this is a population that's actually invested in not being seen or not being found. So how are you going to tell a community that they have to, you know, where we've landed is at least on a monthly basis, be able to account for everyone by name? It was really, really challenging. But our data team put together a set of standards, and we worked to test that with communities over time. And as Roseanne mentioned, we are now in a place where 64 communities across the country have the ability every single month with statistical reliability to say, we know exactly how many people are out there, we know their names, the conditions they're experiencing, and exactly what it might take to connect each one of them to housing. So that alone is
and
a
all that data is
massive
held locally by
achievement.
local officials who are responsible for this issue.
That's right. So every community would have kind of one database that all the different players in that community are reporting into, and then that data is protected at the local level.
Right.
What you see in front of you is sort of the aggregate picture of what that data kind of looks like from 10,000 feet up. So we don't get at Community Solutions individual data on individual people. That belongs with communities. That's sensitive information. But what we do get, and use Tableau to turn around and visualize to communities, is this sense of how many people are out there at any given time. Looks like we're reloading here. I'll just go over here and select veterans, which is the population we'll look at today in Cook County. And when we do that, you'll see very quickly that it's possible every single month. Let me just pull us in here. Every single month to be able to say how many veterans are on the street this month, and more importantly, is that more or fewer veterans than we had last month or the month before, which is what we really want to be able to see. You can go, yeah, go ahead.
So what does this light gray line represent?
Yeah, so this is the actual number of vets in Cook County every month. So you can see if we come over here to May of 2017, which is the month where we determined they had actually gotten to quality, comprehensive data across that whole community. There were 94 vets in that community that were experiencing homelessness that month. We call that active homelessness. Basically, how many people are in front of you right now? what you can see since then is that Cook County has actually pretty steadily been able to drive that number down over time. So before, what we were sort of thinking about is things like, well, how many people are you housing on a regular basis? Or how many people are you making contact with? And we were seeing those kinds of numbers go up and up and up. But that didn't necessarily correlate with this overall number going down, which of course is the thing we all want to see. So when we started to ask a different question, Cook County started being able to drive that number down over time. You can see a couple things here that I think are interesting. These big gray dots is one. We're trying to help communities understand the difference between sort of just natural variation, what's just normal in a system, and real change. So this median basically just represents what's kind of normal in
The
Cook
median's
County
the
right
dark
now.
straight line across there?
This dark line
Yeah.
here. And every time a community sort of gets below the median for 6 months or more, we say that that represents an actual shift in that system. We have confidence that something's really different now. You could expect a different result. And these gray dots are just times in their history when that happened. So this median used to be higher, and now it's moved down and moved down again. So you're seeing what is normal in Cook County change, and we can start to assess that with the data.
So what's normal today in Cook County according to this median?
Yeah, so what we would say is what we're seeing in Cook County right now is we basically expect to see these dots fluctuating around the neighborhood of about 50 or 51 veterans in any given month, which is great because it's almost almost a 50% reduction from where they started.
That's remarkable.
But you've also got a long way to go, right? That's 50 vets today that still need help. And we know some of those vets are moving out of homelessness, new vets are coming in, so it's not a static problem. So we've got to figure out how to wrestle that problem down lower and lower and lower in that place. And to do that, we really need to be able to say what's actually underneath some of these data points. And if you're interested, I could show you sort of where we go there, and we sort of visualize that in a different way.
Absolutely. What is underneath those data points?
Yeah, so this is Cook County, we call this an inflow-outflow chart. And what this is basically visualizing is what portion of that number is people that are coming into homelessness that month for the first time, and then how many people are you getting out of homelessness? And that could look like a few different things. Maybe you know for sure that you house someone, which is great. That's the outcome we want. But somebody also might have found their own solution, or maybe they moved away, or sometimes maybe they passed away. So those are things we want to be able to account for as well to make sure this data is reliable. But in Cook County, let's say you're looking at, I'll take October of 2018. I'm going to have to reload this again. Bear with me, Ned. If I go back into their veterans chart and we look at October of 2018, we can actually drill into those numbers to see where that inflow and outflow are really coming from. And that's when a community starts to get nuanced information it can really use to make changes in its system.
So they might be able to tell if it's a one-off event because an apartment building shut down, or
yeah, that's right,
or whether something occurred that they can focus on, as opposed to just a generalized sense of increased or decreased homelessness.
Yeah, I think what we see is things are really different month over month. This is a really dynamic problem. Part of what it means is new people are experiencing the problem, but also the nature of the problem might change over time. And communities need the ability to respond to that. So here, we can see Cook County can look at its inflow, so people that have entered homelessness that month, and it can see pretty quickly, hey, wait a minute, 90% of the people that we saw coming into homelessness this month are brand new to our system. So we've never seen them before. We've got good data collection across our whole geography now, so we're confident we would have found them if they were homeless already. So what we can say there is we've got a significant problem with new people becoming homeless for the first time, new veterans falling into this system for the first time. And then the question becomes, well, why?
Right.
Because that community has the name and the information about every single one of the people it counted, it can start to look at those profiles and say, hey, were all these people coming from, maybe the same VA medical center, or maybe they're all being discharged from prison, or some combination of things like that. So we can start to track back upstream into those systems and say, would you partner with us to look at this information and see if we could start to do things differently?
Find the agency that might be interested or responsible for helping.
That's exactly right. So now, what this has done for communities is we've gone from having a homelessness problem, which can feel so big as to be unapproachable, to saying actually maybe this is an inflow problem, which is a little smaller, to then being able to say actually we can segment the category of inflow. And if we had to make a decision about where to put our limited resources this month, maybe that's where we want to direct the problem-solving time and effort that we have available to us.
And what does zero represent for these communities? Are there communities that have actually hit zero and it can be shown in the data?
Yeah, it's a great question. We measure it two ways, so it depends on population. And without getting too much into the weeds and boring everyone, there's basically chronic homelessness, which is really long-term homelessness. You know, people out on the street for a year or more. And then there's sort of everything else. So veterans, families, youth. What makes those groups different is the day they hit the street, they are a homeless veteran, a homeless family, a homeless young person. Whereas with chronic homelessness, you really need to be out there for a long time. So with chronic homelessness, because you have such a long lead time, you've got a whole year to try to resolve someone's situation, we think it actually really should be possible to get all the way to an absolute hard zero or pretty darn close. So what we say for most communities is we want to see you at 3 people or less. So you have a little bit of slack in that system
In that
to
chronic
work
category.
with people,
Yeah.
but not too much. With veterans, we look at this a little differently, and I can try to show you here. Let's see if this will.
How many communities now
Load up.
have reached zero for functional zero, I guess is the correct term for veterans?
So it's 9 communities that have gotten to zero on veterans, and then another 3 communities that have gotten to zero on chronic. And 2 of those have gotten to zero on both, which is really exciting.
Remarkable.
Yeah. But this is what zero really looks like. So this is veterans data. This is Rockford, Illinois, a city people may remember from A League of Their Own.
Yeah.
But you know, Rockford started with us, and they had a good number of homeless veterans. I think initially they were starting with about 45. So it's not a huge city, you know, but it's a classic kind of post-industrial case. And what we said to them is we wanted to see if they could really bring that number down over time. And in December of 2015, so actually just off this chart, they got there. Rockford became the very first city to get to zero. What that meant for us is that they never had more veterans experiencing homelessness than they were proving they could house in a routine month. So if I've got 9 veterans experiencing homelessness this month, I know that for the last 6 months, I've housed at least 9 veterans on average, and I'm confident I now have a system that can keep up with that demand. So that, you know, doesn't mean no veteran is ever gonna have a crisis ever again, but when they come into that crisis, we're confident that community can move them through that system very, very quickly and resolve that situation, you know, as fast as possible. I think the other thing that's really exciting about Rockford is you can see in this chart, they've been able to actually, this is their, that functional zero line, you know, where they got to functional zero, they've been able to hold under that line now for over 2 years. And we can actually see that, you know, month over month in near real time, which is really, really exciting. But also, if that data started to tick up, you know, let's say, like you said, a building closed maybe, and suddenly a bunch of people were on the street, or maybe there's a big structural change in the economy or something like that, and they started to see more veterans becoming homeless. Well, in the past, it would have taken them over a year to even know that at all.
To have any understanding of what happened.
Yeah, much less pull people together and try to respond. Now, within a month, Rockford knows, hey, we've got a problem. Something that used to be working is not working anymore. Let's kind of call the team together, you know, sound the alarm and see if we could figure out what's going on here. And they can start to drive that number back down.
So functional zero essentially means that the community is ready to house people at that number as soon as they become aware of the problem, more or less. And so in here, we see that that number is basically 8 for Rockford.
For
in other
Rockford.
words, 8 people coming in through the inflow in any given month. The community knows how to address that by and large.
It's
and is able to
actually-
get them
There can only be 8 people experiencing homelessness at all or less.
I see. Okay.
Because we've proven we can house at least 8
see.
a month. So basically, no one's going to be homeless longer than a month in the system that looks like this.
Does this give any predictive capabilities, sort of looking down the road capabilities to people running a community?
Yeah, it's funny you should mention, this is where a lot of people are interested in going. I think it's a place where we're really interested in learning, but I'll give you one example, which is, this is Montgomery County. This is right outside of Washington, D.C. And what you're looking at here is chronic homelessness. And you can see it's really quite dramatic. They have been able to bend the curve significantly on chronic homelessness, and they're really honing in on zero. But something interesting happens right about here. Montgomery County has now this really excellent data quality, this by name, real-time data. And somebody in that county gets smart and starts to say, wait a minute, could we start to use this to do some predictive planning around our housing resources? You know, how much housing do we actually need over time to be able to hit zero and stay there? And they started using some of this data to do some light modeling. What they were able to do is go to their county government and make much more stable projections because they had so much more data about, hey, what does inflow look like? What does turnover in existing housing look like? What could we expect to see over time? And right about here, you actually see that county government, which had been asked for more housing resources for a long, long time, suddenly become convinced that the data was good enough, that if they would make that investment, they could have some confidence it would actually get their community to zero.
I see.
And look at this second very, very steep reduction that you start to see with the onboarding of those new resources in Montgomery County.
Was that related to investments in housing?
Yeah, this is just the county sort of turning on the tap and saying, okay, we believe in what you're doing. We think this is a good investment. The money's going to do what it's supposed to do. We're willing to put that money on the table.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jake. This is incredibly illuminating. There's nothing like data to let you know where you stand, and I think that's what is unfolding for these cities, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks for your interest.
Great.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ned. Thanks, Jake. That was wonderful. So like we mentioned at the top, we're here in the Kaiser Permanente Healthy Housing Lounge, and I'm here with Dr. Bashara Shukair, Chief Community Health Officer with Kaiser Permanente. You had a pretty big announcement today, just a few hours ago on a panel here at South by Southwest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it, and could you talk a little bit about the connection that KP really sees between housing and healthcare?
Well, thank you, Steve, for having me here, and we're so excited about our announcement and the partnership with Community Solutions that we've announced earlier today. So let me start by mentioning why housing and health are so interconnected. And we truly believe that there is no way that we can expect people to live healthy lives if they don't have stable housing, if they don't have a stable roof over their head. And what we know from research is that housing and health are so interconnected. So if you happen to be homeless, chances are that you're going to die 27 years younger than if you're housed. Chances are your mortality rate's going to be much higher. If you're more likely to have chronic diseases, communicable diseases, and if you end up in the hospital, you're more likely to stay 2 to 3 days longer, and you're more likely to be readmitted to the hospital after you've been discharged. So that connection between housing and health is very critical.
So, I mean, it's fascinating. Why the focus on chronic homelessness?
Because what we know from research, again, is that chronic homelessness is all tied to all of these issues. It is tied to higher total cost of care, higher mortality, and all the other stuff that we know is just not good for you.
And I heard you speaking a little earlier today about the role data plays, particularly in both the overall housing and health strategy as well as your specific relationship with Community Solutions. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're mostly excited about the partnership with Community Solution is their focus on data, focus on science, focus on that approach and methodology that helps you to get into understanding what's happening in your community. Because at the end of the day, for years when we look at data when it comes to homelessness, it is usually tied to that point-in-time care that happens, point-in-time count that happens once a year. So it's really important to be able to get that data level down to the individual people, developing these by name lists so we can understand who's homeless, when this person's homeless, what are the conditions around this person, so we can create an intervention that's for a community of one to support that person and get them housed.
Okay. That's fascinating. I know Roseanne mentioned a little bit earlier, particularly the point in time count, and some of the, especially when you're dealing with chronic homeless populations, there's a certain complexity that comes with not having regular data. When you do think about particular metrics as you're thinking about the work with Community Solutions, what are you focused on?
So for us, I mean, we are the largest nonprofit integrated care delivery system, and we truly believe in data. We truly believe in the ability to think and design intervention based on science, based on data, and that's what really attracted us to Community Solutions. And this is an organization that does have a track record. I mean, since 2015, they've housed over 60,000, or they helped communities house over 65,000 veterans and over 35,000 people who are chronically homeless. So that's why we're so excited about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, we're really excited to be working with you together on this and the 15 Kaiser communities that Community Solutions is going to be focusing on. It's a wonderful opportunity to make a meaningful difference. So thank you very much for excellent. And thanks for having us here in the lounge. This is a wonderful space down here in Texas. So it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to head over here a little bit and talk to somebody I spend a lot of time with. This is Jason Schumacher. He's the head of grant making across the U.S. for Tableau Foundation. Jason, hi.
Hi.
Could you talk a little bit for me about why Tableau Foundation took an interest in community solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this all really started after we established the foundation in 2014, and we started to see this emergent challenge in addressing homelessness in our home city of Seattle. The city declared a state of emergency on homelessness, and we started trying to figure out what can we do? What can we do with kind of our superpowers of being able to provide software, provide funding, and provide support to organizations working on this. And that's kind of how we got started working with community solutions.
That's great. And how, as you were researching in homelessness and how different organizations were approaching the issue, and particularly the role data played, what was it about community solutions that stood out?
Community Solutions has had this amazing track record.
Yeah.
So they've had the 100,000 Homes campaign that's helped house so many people throughout the US, and then kind of the advent of Built for Zero to work towards functional zero has been just something that's been incredible to see, and kind of see how much trust there has been built up in the community, and how much the communities that Community Solutions works with really end up having this deep level of trust in the work and the support that Community Solutions offers. So that's been huge. And they're not only leaders in terms of how they work with data, but they're leaders in terms of the types of interventions that can be used. And so they've got the trust to be able to come in, work with communities, be able to advocate for quality by name lists, be able to advocate for this quality data use, and make it kind of integrated with the whole system of helping the continuums of care get to the point where they can really effectively take advantage of this data.
Yeah, and you mentioned, we've heard about the by name lists a few times. That's, one of those really interesting insights that's come out of this work. What other things have you taken from this partnership that maybe apply to some of our other Tableau Foundation partners? What else are you seeing that's sort of a unique insight about the way these kinds of impactful organizations can use data?
One of the biggest things that I see in all of our work through Tableau Foundation is that the biggest part of making data actionable and making it truly effective is making sure that it's not punitive, making sure that the data isn't used in such a way that people are really fearful of taking advantage of it or exposing it to daylight. And Community Solutions has been able to take this data and provide it to communities in a way that, even by just looking at inflows and outflows, it's not trying to assign blame. It's not trying to end up saying, hey, this provider is doing especially well, this one's doing poorly, but it's trying to look at the system holistically and use that data to inform the decisions, not to drive the ultimate decision, but to inform the decision-making potential that these communities have.
Yeah, so for as much as it's about data, it's still about people.
Oh,
and the
absolutely.
ability of folks to kind of have a shared vocabulary and shared understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely. Data is one input into the decisions that communities have to make, and it's an important one, but it's ultimately decisions that are still being made by people.
Yeah. I know the answer because I sit next to you every day, but what are some of the aha moments that you could share with the viewers that we've learned along the way?
I think that the biggest thing is that, showing that it can work. Being able to see that, just by providing things like inflow and outflow and providing this data on a regular basis, being able to do something like that and seeing the communities respond and being able to say, wow, this is actually driving change, that's a huge aha moment. Because there's this conception that homelessness is too large of a problem to solve. And I think that what this work really focuses on, the core of it, is to disprove that idea and to show that homelessness is something that we can fix.
Yeah,
And one other thing that I was going to say is, it's amazing to see the participation of the Tableau community.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the big things that we've been able to do is we've been able to pull in and kind of get our network of super enthusiastic customers engaged. And so there's this group of customers called Tableau Zen Masters. And they're just these all-star kind of consultants that help with projects like this and are super active in the community. And they've been such a huge help in being able to kind of consult and provide this change management and help Community Solutions roll out these dashboards to their communities. And we're really looking forward to seeing how they can help pull things together going forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is our opportunity to say thanks in particular to Ken and Ann and Lilia. Thank you for all of the support you provided to Community Solutions. It's great. So that's really it. We're going to wrap up here from Austin, South by. Thank you very much for having us. You know, it's a big day. $1.3 million grant to Community Solutions. We're going to end veteran and chronic homelessness in 50 communities. It's incredibly exciting. And, you know, viewers at home, you can participate as well. We're running a campaign on Twitter, on social media. If you use the hashtag #BringHousingHome, you can shout out your community, shout out your mayor, city council, county executive, whatever the provider in your area is. Tell them you want to bring housing home. Tell them you want data to be a piece of how they ultimately are solving the homelessness puzzle in your community. So thank you, the Community Solutions team. Thank you to everybody at Kaiser Permanente. It's been a wonderful experience, and we'll see you all later. Have a good one. Bye.